Welcome to The First Turn. I'm your host, Hyena, and today, Llama and I are talking about This Week in Warhammer. If you like what you hear, give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share, or let us know if there's something you'd like to hear us talk about. Alright, let's get to it.
We've got some stuff to talk about. Oh man, we're sitting so close to Adepticon.
2 weeks and some change.
I'm not done painting. I've got 3 colors.
I'm not done painting.
I'm done. You know, I could be done if I wanted to. But I'm not. I'm gonna stop there. I got more to do.
If that's good enough for you.
It's not. I need to do more. But I'm ready.
Reach for more. You're a reacher.
Yeah.
Amazon series, by the way. Very entertaining.
Yeah, I've heard from you. That's the only place I've ever talked about it. So, okay. So, kind of light week. Like I said, I think gearing up towards a new convention.
I think they're gearing up to Adepticon.
We're going to see some stuff there. A couple things have happened. We've got some rumors to talk about. We've got a couple of little releases. Obviously, we've got, every week we get a new Horus Heresy model. This week is a Blood Angel Praetor.
Those Praetors all look pretty good. They do.
Yeah, I got my... I might get one at Adepticon, but they released a Raven Guard one a couple weeks ago.
Yes, they did.
That looks pretty slick.
Yes,
I do like it.
I even like the one for the Irons.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm always almost back into it.
Yeah.
Almost. I'm partially into that Legion just as much as like Ferris was a part of the Legion.
Well, he was a part after a while too.
He wasn't a complete Primarch.
Because he was separated from his head.
Yeah. He was. Makes it difficult to run it from 2 locations.
Mm-hmm.
But
what if he's still alive? I've seen weirder things happen, right?
I know Sanguinius...
He was part, necrodermis. So,
He was. Because he fought some mysterious thing in the center of Medusa.
You mean a Catan shard?
Probably a Catan shard.
And absorbed
and became
the living metal?
Liquid metal, yeah. And a ghost of him or a specter of him met with Sanguinius before his fight with us.
But that might just be welcoming him into the other side. Welcome, brother. You're also going to die.
And he was also saying, I'm not a trick, but that's right, Horus is at this level, stuck here. But then the Emperor used some version of his first iteration of the Legion of the Damned. He was an aspect of was Ferris, which goes with this character. He was
would be really interesting is if they did do that, where they don't do an Iron Hands detachment or supplement, but they do a Legion of the Damned supplement, and then they use that as a way to release a Ferris Manus model.
Primarch.
That would be super cool.
Just a flaming Ferris.
Yeah, and then but the whole Legion would be that, and it's a new army technically because they've never done it before.
Yep.
And there've been units and rules, but they make the whole Legion that, and it's rules for that Legion of the Damned, and they get access to all the Space Marine stuff. You just got to paint them Legion with the damned colors and stuff. That would be interesting.
Super unique deployment rules, I'm sure.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
I think, you know what? I'm on board for that. We should email them, but do it.
Yeah.
If you haven't done it yet, do it.
And whoever is in charge, whoever's the head of that would have, that would be fitting. Yep.
Anyway, it's not funny when you explain it.
He was decapitated.
Decapitation
is when someone's head has been separated.
So yeah, good idea. I like that. But yeah, it's a little bit of a quiet season because we're gearing up towards a convention. Like I said, 2 weeks ago. Really excited. I say it every time.
I'm excited. I'm ready to go now. I am. Even though my piece that I had hoped to enter in Golden Daemon is nowhere near done, I'm still excited to go anyway.
Yeah.
Whether or not it gets done.
And get some work done.
Yeah.
I've actually been cranking out on the airbrush recently to get a bunch of mine done.
Yeah.
Just because it does lay down some base colors really quickly. Because I've got 40 or 50 models.
Well, and that needle that came with that one, the 0.28, is precise, but not slow.
Right. I do feel like I would want to get a smaller one, just because I do want to try the whole method of finishing with an airbrush.
Finishing a blend.
And that one is it's still a little too wide to get the precision that I want. I find myself overspraying a lot, even with that small 2.8.
Well, and some of it with the Harder and Steenbeck newer models is the trigger. So what I found, I have 2. I have a 0.28 and then I have a 0.45. And when I'm doing priming and pre-shading, I'll do the 0.45 and it's real fast for that, obviously. But then I found that if I sit there and just play with the trigger for a while and find a thing, you can get to where you get really precise with it, with the 2.8 at least.
Well, for mine, when I was messing with that, I was getting really small amount of paint coming out, and so I could really build up the layers.
Yeah.
But
Inks
even
go really well
then,
through,
the cone, from the, unless I got like within like an inch of it, the cone was still just, it was a little too wide from where I was spraying from.
I might buy
so
some.
maybe it's just a getting used to it kind of thing too.
I might buy some extra stuff when we're at Adepticon because they had a whole booth for them. And having multiple nozzles and needles is great, but it's like a hassle to change them out. You also risk damaging parts when you do that. So I'm tempted to get just a second airbrush.
Another airbrush.
I didn't think I would be that guy.
Don't even swap out.
Yeah, I didn't even think I would ever be that guy. But it's like when you talked about building riptides, where it's like, well, I could magnetize these 3 riptides, or I could buy 3 more riptides.
Just make it easy. Just have 3 of each. No problem. Mm-hmm. Whatever weapon option you want, just have a different one.
Yeah.
Because it's not worth the hassle sometimes to magnetize.
Well, and they are precision pieces of equipment, and airbrushes, when you buy a really high quality one, are like a lifetime hobby investment. And so it's like, I don't want to damage it and have to keep buying needles and nozzles and then...
Well, I did notice that because like most of the airbrushes I've had have been kind of cheap. It's similar to when you like actually invest in some actual nice brushes.
Yep.
Some actual manual brushes. It's you start to wonder, have I gotten better or have I just been using crappy products and crappy tools this whole time
for so long?
Because it does feel like that. I mean, I haven't airbrushed in a very long time, to the point where like I didn't know where any of like the components were. I had my compressor, I had the airbrush. I'm like, okay, now where's the hose? Okay, found a hose. It doesn't fit either side. Where's the converters? Where's the attachments? Like I spent like an hour and a half just going through all my stuff, looking for the parts to get the airbrush working. And by the time I was done, I was like, I don't feel like airbrushing anymore. But the next night when I started doing it, I haven't airbrushed in a long time. I did it. I'm like, wow, I'm fucking awesome at this. You know what I mean? Like I was really good at airbrushing. So it's like, hey, have I just been using bad tools this whole time? And if all the frustration I've had around airbrushing has been basically enough to make me not want to do it, right? Because I start airbrushing and it's like, okay, I'm getting a little bit of flow out of this thing. Now it's jammed. Now it's clogged. Now it's spraying too much. Now it's sputtering. Now it's shooting paint piss all over the place. Like, you know, like it was such a frustrating experience. I was
and I think P has 2 modes. It has boy, that's satisfying, and that is really annoying.
Right, and it's like, where is it going?
Yeah.
2 modes. But the experiences I had before was it was a battle with the airbrush itself, not the struggle trying to get the results I was looking for. Like it was just trying to get it to spray consistently. You know, it's like I can't get this airbrush to work, and then I end up getting frustrated with it and putting it down and get nothing done, or the results I get are just sputtery and covered in speckles. You know, and it's just I go back with the brush and I have to cover all that up. So it's like, why did I even airbrush in the first place? It was a lot of that as my early experiences with an airbrush. This one, though, it was like, I'm doing this every time now. Because it was effective.
Well, and there are some that are less expensive than, obviously, Harder and Steenbeck, which are very pricey. There are some like Iwata and Badger that people use and they swear by. And I'm sure some of those are really good once you get comfortable with them. But, man, there was something about my first one being this version that was just like...
the first one you've used.
Yeah, and it was
you've
like...
bought airbrushes before and just never...
And I never used it.
Yeah.
It remained in its packaging and then was sold. Now,
but we've done that a few times with different new products where we buy it, we're like, yeah, we're going to do this. And then it just kind of sits. I mean, we did that with oil washes. We did it with enamel washes. We did it with pigment powders and pigment washes and like all kinds of different like really cool hobby cheat tools that we just never kind of got around to using and trying, you know? And it's like, we've gotten to most of it now.
Yeah.
And this time around, the airbrush was actually cracked out of the plastic and actually, you know, used. And I think both of us are happy with airbrushing a little bit.
Yeah, it's and they make some really good ones. They're like mechanically kind of complicated, but it's just so smooth. And I've done everything from priming to like finalizing some details, and it's worked really great. So I think I'll stick with it and buy probably another one of their brand. Yeah. Like I won't buy one of the ones where it's like, hey, this is the exact same one that would normally be $160, but we're charging $380 because it's got an anime scroll on it, or it's got some guy's name on it, like, you know, whatever. But I'll look for them at Adepticon and maybe buy another one.
For sure. Like I said, I'm happy with mine. It's gotten a lot of work done for the models I need to do in a very short.
Because you're playing an event at Adepticon, right?
So basically now I just need. I've kind of laid down some highlights for skin and stuff, and it sped up skin a lot, which was nice.
So I'm interested in that. How did you? So Dark Oath
Dark Oath is what I'm building and putting
Because
together.
I didn't use an airbrush on the only Dark Oath I painted, and
Right.
that was frustrating.
So like going high on the highlights. So I started off with a Bugman's over black.
Mm-hmm.
And
Bugman's is the equivalent for those who maybe use a different paint. It's like a red beige.
Yeah.
It's a darker rosy
Yep.
red brown
to kind of lay in that like those under layers of
and
the
it has
skin.
some grayscale mixed in it, so it coats real well.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, I did black primer, very light zenithal, the red brown Bugman's Glow, which is a great paint, and with a little bit of air thinner. Any paint can be an airbrush paint, and it worked just fine. I actually have I believe the Iwata. I believe it's the Iwata like cube of thinner, and it works really well. And I laid on. I did that. Then I mixed the Bugman's with some Kislev flesh, and then I added a little bit of
which has a little bit of yellow and white in it.
Yep.
Kislev flesh. Yeah.
When you're adding a mixture to something to lighten it up without losing intensity of color. Generally, if it's a warm color, you want to add a bright yellow or light yellow instead of adding white.
It adds luminosity to it. Yep.
Yeah. So you're not losing your tones. But it was a 1-to-1 mix of that, and then eventually I added in a little bit of pallid witch flesh instead of white to get my highest highlights. And then I'm actually going to go back onto the skin and actually do a thin down contrast wash with a red-brown flesh tone, basically, to kind of blend it together and give it a little bit more warmth back. And because I want my barbarians to be dirty. You know, I don't want them to be bright and clean and shiny.
Well, the story with Dark Oath and from some of their recent lore. Now, I haven't read the whole Gunnerbrand book. I read some bits that were available for free, and then in the Slaves to Darkness battle tome, and then as well as the novel I was reading recently, God Eater's Son. So it talks about Dark Oath culture, and that's exactly what they are. They are very poor. They are people who've been disenfranchised from civilization, and so that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Right.
And so that's a good aesthetic, I think, to include in their clothing, their armor, their skin.
Yep.
They're malnourished. They live in the dregs.
But yeah, so my barbarians are going to be very, very dirty. But I feel like doing when you over exaggerate with your highlights and your low lights, and then you come in with a wash to create a medium tone.
Which, by the way, washes and contrast paints go through an airbrush real nice. At least with these.
Yes, I do. And then with my Dark Oath, my colors for their glows and their flames lean into like the magentas. That's my thing. Because mine are kind of leaning heavily into Bellacor's Bros, which I've given him like a purpley kind of shadow. Sort of glow and tone for all of them. So I did that with the Endless Spells. They're kind of fire with some magenta tones to it. I need to add some really punchy highlights, both yellow and magenta. I think I'm going to use my my Doomfire Warlock pink purple kind of contrast.
Which is a very saturated contrast.
Yep. But it's very, very saturated, very, very bright. It's like almost like a fluoro. Even though they call it contrast, it's more like a technical paint, honestly, where it's just you use this as a finisher. I wouldn't wash this over top of things. I don't even know what it would look like if you
Imperial Fist Yellow was that way.
Yeah, if you wash this over white, like I don't know what that would look like. That'd be wild. Kind of like look at Volupus pink or purple, whatever it is. It's like a full saturation. Cover whatever you put it on.
Sigismund is that.
Sigismund's like that. Yeah.
Volupus is super pale or super transparent.
There's another one then that's like a pink. There's like an Emperor's Children type color.
Sigismund is that way. It's
not Sigismund.
Or not Sigismund.
Sigvald.
It's super saturated.
That's the one. Okay.
Sigismund's
that's
the Imperial
the one
Fist.
That's what I was thinking of. Okay.
Sigvald the Magnificent. His contrast paint is very saturated. Yeah, very, very. Like if you put it over a light primer, it's like full coverage.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, I need to go back in with a little bit of highlights to make it punchier. I'm going to take some, do some weathering on it, like my terrain piece and like the metal on the Endless Spells and stuff to like with basically just some Rhinox hide, which is like a dark brown, reddish brown.
Leads red. Yep. Instead of blue.
You sponge on. Weathering basically to kind of break up some of the glow, break up some of the metal, make it a little dirtier, make them a little grungy, not just shiny silver.
You're a fan of that.
I am. Yeah, I like
every army you have, you're like, I like old gold. I like
do.
guys
I
who've
like-
been there for a
I
while.
like leaning into the wear and tear. Except my
but you're not like Blanchitsu.
right. I don't want everything covered in shit.
You may have just
I'm
lost
sorry, like,
all
I'm
4
sorry.
viewers
I'm
we have.
sorry, like it's not. But there was a Leviathan Dreadnought that was submitted to Golden Demon last year, or the year before. It was a Nurgle,
2 years
it was
ago.
a Nurgle one.
Yep.
And it got highly rated.
It won an award.
Gold or silver. But when you look at it, it's like you just slapped like texture basing paint over top of the entire model to texture the entire thing, and then threw washes on it, and it got an award. It was like, I don't understand. That didn't make any sense to me. But that Blanchy style,
Blanchitsu,
yeah,
Grimdark.
is very grimdark. There's lots of conversions, which I do appreciate. The amount of conversions, everything
Absolutely
gets turned into something else in that style, and it's amazing. And I love that everything is unique. However, the amount of like washing and stuff, like nothing is ever that dirty. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like even cloth never gets that dirty as what's presented, and so it's, to me, it's a little over the top. It's like I get dark, right? I get grim, I get all that. It's too much in my mind. You tone it back a little bit,
right? It's like so. I mean, his influence on the hobby is unquestionable, and he was one of the first that we heard about in a Games Workshop context who would do oil washes,
right?
And but an oil wash, when you don't do the cleanup after, is that it's kind of muddy,
right?
And you lose a lot of punch, you lose a lot of contrast, you lose a lot of the detail. You know, while some like that style, I don't know. I appreciate the influence. The finished result to me is yeah,
it's a little too not polished enough.
So it's like,
you know,
Bob Ross used to talk about that with his oil paintings, when he would talk about if you didn't layer from the background to the foreground or from the dark to the light correctly, you would end up with what's called a mud mix, or you'd be a mud mixer, because oil paint will do that on top of itself, where it just turns into a mixture of brown.
Mm-hmm.
And like the Blanchitsu style, when I see people say that was my biggest influence, and then they do it, and then you see it, and it's like, okay, everybody draws influence from something, and art is subjective,
right? And I can't say that
But, like,
I see the influence present in your presentation, but
sometimes it's like well, that just looks like mud. Like it's like you did the dip without the cleanup, you did the oil wash without the cleanup, and then it's like streaky and messy, and
right.
Like you can do that with cleanup or with refinement, and then have it still look grimdark, still look old and weathered, but then still look have a lot of contrast, still pop.
Mm-hmm.
It won't be vibrant, but it'll pop.
Right.
And you seem to like that on everything from your Stormcast, your Skaven, to your
vampires.
Yeah.
My vampires are very old metal. These guys might be the most colorful of my armies, because they have a lot of browns, but there's a lot of like red in it. There's like my secondary color is dark green, which highlights up into like a gray green. So like that stands out a lot. There's a lot of skin tone. There's a lot of like the glows are purple. So like this might be my most colorful army, honestly.
Your Dark Oath?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or my Slaves of Darkness in general, but my Dark Oath especially, because they don't have a lot of the dark armor that my Chaos Warrior side has. They have lots of skin and fur, so they stand out a lot better. So
boots with the fur.
Yeah. So it fits. They fit together in the same color scheme, but like the barbarians will be much more bright and colorful than any of my other Chaos Warriors are, or my chosen.
And the airbrush got you through the skin.
Pretty
quick,
pretty fast. I mean, like I said, I had like 38 models to do that were mostly skin and horses and stuff like that, and it got through a lot of it in like I don't know, 2 or 3 hours. Like
Okay,
it was pretty great. With a little bit of washing, a little bit of that. I can call it good with very little effort. So that's what I need for a tabletop army. You know,
points.
1,000 of them. I've got another like 7,000 already done. You know, like, yeah, it's my biggest
for
armies.
my Slaves to Darkness. I have
You have
5 models.
You have 78 points done.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
maybe.
have like 5 models.
I know. I remember seeing you had a painted chosen model.
I had a painted Chosen. I have a painted Dark Oath War Queen.
Yep.
I have a painted
So it's more than that.
Exalted Champion on foot.
Sword and Shield guy.
Yeah. I have a started Eternus.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever get Bellacore done?
No.
I mean, it's mostly, right?
He started.
Kinda
Like,
blue-
he's...
okay.
I could put him on the tabletop and he's fine, but he's not done. But the...
Archaon?
gray plastic with sticky tack still. Yeah. And the thing is, where I stopped mostly was I wasn't happy with the Dark Oath War Queen when I tried it the first time, but I had originally assumed that the airbrush with all that skin and armor so in such close proximity wouldn't work. But you being able to do it with the airbrush is like, okay, maybe that won't be as tricky as it seems.
I mean, it'll need some cleanup, especially if you overspray.
Because they'll
overspray,
right.
You know. But yeah, it got a lot of the layers on the places that I wanted it pretty quickly.
Well, because with Warriors and Chosen, for example, you don't really need cleanup because it's armor. And so if you miss a spot, it's like once you do the oil wash or whatever, or the enamel pass, like then it's like it covers it anyway. But when you have flesh next to armor, it's like, you kind of have to clean that up.
You don't like metal, like silver, like
biceps.
Biceps, yeah. No.
I also don't like pink on my steel armor, right? Yeah.
Fun fact, kids who are listening, if you ever submit for anything, whether it's a painting competition, a local one, best in show for a tournament, things like that, cleanliness is the biggest contributing factor to scoring high. If you've got like a decently painted model, but at certain angles you can see you've used your brush on something and gotten it onto a part it's not supposed to be, and you left it, judges knock hard for that kind of thing.
It's 3 C's. It's completeness, it's cleanliness, it's contrast.
Right.
Like those 3 things you can do for best in show, like for an army, armies on parade, or like Adepticon where everybody puts their armies out that get judged for the painting part of it. Yeah, that's it. Or even at our own IOWOG, we do that.
Yeah, cleanliness, consistency, big contributing factors for sure. And so if you're wondering, well, like, how can I take my painting to the next level? It's those are the answers: consistency, cleanliness, and contrast.
You know, taking it to the next level for painting, it's interesting as I see the Eeavy Metal style, which is what Games Workshop uses for their box art or for any close-up shots on the Warcom site for their...
Well, most close-up shots. They've featured a couple close-ups that were just base coat contrasted lately. I've seen a couple on the Warhammer articles.
Well, they'll show off employee and community artist stuff, but when they do like their box art for their new releases, the Eeavy Metal style is one that's on there, and there's mixed reviews. You know, like you have fans who don't like it, you have others who aspire to it. Mm-hmm. Now, it's funny is there are people out there in the community who used to work for the Eeavy Metal team who still are affiliated with GW, like Darren Latham. And then even, you know, your Golden Daemon and Slayer Sword award-winning artist who have commented on it. And the Eeavy Metal, and I say it like that because they specifically don't have an H, no right? H. Apostrophe E-A, yeah. Yeah. It is actually an incredibly difficult style to master, and it's a very high standard. And the reason is, so it's designed around, they try to get everybody in their Eeavy Metal team, which is different from their painting studio, which does their stuff for army background shots, which those are the guys like what Peachy used to do, where they just paint stuff real fast to show up in a photo in the background of something or in the army pictures in a codex. But for their box art, or if that new model release is featured on Warhammer Community, they up the game a bit. And they don't paint it to a style that's necessarily realistic in terms of volumetry and light. They're painting it in a way that shows off every feature of the model, every feature of the product in 360 degrees.
Right.
So they have to focus on things like lines and shadows. And so people will misconstrue what that means, because they'll hear things like edge highlighting, and they'll think of like those guys who would do Tau suits, where it's like, well, we're going to take this broadside and we're going to paint it flat purple, and then we're going to do either a sky blue or fluorescent pink edge highlight. And that's what they think of when they hear edge highlighting. And it's not that at all. Look at an Eeavy Metal paint job on a box art for a character or a squad release, and you won't believe the precision. So they have to do panel lining and edge highlighting in a way where the line looks almost like it was drawn with a laser. And then, yeah, they'll have little dots of light, but they won't do a dramatic light source, because it has to be in such a way that when you turn it at any angle, it looks the same.
Right.
Now, some people like that look on their armies, some don't. that's neither here nor there. I think everybody should practice it, though, because it helps you with learning brush control. The Eeavy Metal style is wonderful for learning how to master painting fine lines, straight lines, spot highlights.
It's almost like
keeping edges clean.
It's almost like
it almost is.
Panel line, right?
Right.
Because it's like you need to have this consistent, smooth, even thickness of line around a panel edge, but not be able to see the actual edge of the line somehow.
Right.
Like you don't want a stark difference of like, oh, here's where it's black leading into like your light blue highlight for the ring around the panel. It just happens and you don't know where it starts, really.
Yep. And it really shows off the product, like the design style that GW has, the aesthetic they have. It shows off the style. And that precision, like I said, for any artist is great to practice. It'll help you with your brush control. It'll help you with understanding the separation between the different three-dimensional objects and showcasing them on what the detail is so small that it almost is a two-dimensional space. And so I think it's a good thing for people to practice. Take a standard Space Marine one you've gotten for free or extra or in a magazine or whatever, because Space Marines are especially designed to maximize that. And then the other thing they do is they will still get pretty high contrast, but where someone who's more artistic might do contrast on multiple levels, whether it's color contrast, light contrast, volumetric contrast, GW will do this very subtle. So if they're doing an ultramarine, they'll take their base, Cantor blue, and they'll mix it with just a pinch of black to do the first recess shade, and then a pinch more to do the panel line. And then on the highlight, they'll go up maybe 3, 4, 5, but it's just barely a shade up each time, and so you can hardly notice the transition, but it really gives it an effective, clean look when you view it, which again shows off the product. They want to sell the product, but I think that's great for people to practice to work on brush control skills.
Right.
Is that Eeavy Metal style that will build up your steady hand, that will build up your straight lines, that will build up your knowing where the light point should be, and then I think then when you go into more artistic leaning, it's like when you're doing a scale figure, a bust, or if you just want to do dramatic lighting, I figured that'll almost be easier because it's a lot more free form.
And I feel it's a little deceiving too for especially new painters that was like, I see the box art, I love this model, I want to paint it like that. What colors do I need? Because we get that question quite a bit, and it's like, all of them?
Yeah.
I mean, because that ends up being kind of what the answer is sometimes. Because like on the back of the box, when you look at it, you're like, okay, here's the colors that were used for this paint scheme, and you look and it's like 7, and it's like, well,
really they used like 42. Like
it's a lot more than that because there's lots of mixing. There's lots of things that aren't out of the pot that create a paint effect. There's a lot of things that aren't just in a brush. It's in brush control and it's in the painter to create an effect that really sells the look and the appearance, and it's like it's a little I don't know, disheartening when a new painter starts and they use the colors that are recommended and they say, well, I did the base color and I washed it, why doesn't it look anywhere close to what the box art has? They can't be using these same colors. And it's like, well, it's a photo, it's in perfect lighting, which often makes a color look brighter than it does in your hands, right? Maybe not brighter than it really is, but under perfect lighting, it's like the color shows like the color. So perfect studio lighting, perfect angles, perfect focus, perfect everything for a bright background, whatever. And then also a lot more colors than what they're telling you are there.
Yep.
And so it's like, as a painter who's experienced, you know this, but it's trying to convince someone who's not an experienced painter that you got to temper some expectations about what you're going to be able to produce with a limited number of paints.
Well, and all the paints they show you on the back of the box were used in the painting of that model, but what they don't show you is like how many 50-50 steps you had to mix to get from A to B, and so that's how they get that Eeavy Metal look to look so refined, so crisp, so clean. And it's funny is when they used to have what were called games days in the U.S., and we would go to those, and they would have some of those studio models on display. And in person, they look incredible. But it's like subtle. Mm-hmm. When you go to Golden Daemon, which we're about to see in a couple weeks,
it's the same kind of deal. It's such soft, silky, like smooth transitions to a lot of things.
It's more dramatic.
And you're like, wow.
It's more dramatic because like they're taking an artistic leading. Mm-hmm. But like you'll still realize quickly that it's like, okay, so the color's not as saturated as it was in their Instagram picture, right? Mm-hmm. or you can see maybe imperfections because you can recognize the brush strokes, and the Eeavy Metal one's like that, but it is still very crisp and clean. And so again, I think that's a great thing. And there's a ton of painters right now who used to work in the Eeavy Metal team and now have branched off on their own, and you can go look at their way of doing where they explain step by step how we did this for Eeavy Metal, and that is a great way to learn basic brush control, very subtle mix of shade and highlight if you're afraid to try something dramatic. And that, I think, is a great way to up your game dramatically without trying to find shortcuts when you're early in your painting journey.
Where's the contrast in a bottle that I slap over white to make this effect work?
Right.
You know, that kind of thing. Because it's, I mean, we're getting closer to that. Yeah. There is some of that, right? Where it's here's a wash that doesn't behave like an acrylic, that covers in such a way where it tints a surface, but then
settles in the recesses.
It recedes from that surface after it's tinted it, and then makes it darker in a recess. And when it finally dries over the course of 24 hours, you get this really dramatic gradient from just putting a wash on something.
Yeah.
Like we're getting closer to that because it makes that type of painting more accessible to everyone. But it also kind of like increases the bar. You know, when it's really easy to get an effect like that just using a paint like that, all of a sudden, if you can create that effect using a brush and normal paints, it doesn't look as impressive, right? Because it's like, well, I just slapped some contrast on over a Zenithal, and I got pretty close. And it took me, a tenth the time. So I mean, it is that part of it too. Like we're like real artistry in the hobby is accelerating, even not even just advancing, but accelerating. It's getting better faster. And like the Eeavy Metal team, like we said, while they do really good job in box art and making a solid rubric basically for how they want all of their models to be produced, they break their rules a little bit too.
They do.
There's some models that come out where we're like, hey, hang on a second. This is an Eeavy Metal style. Look at the bolt casing of this gun, or look at the armor panel or the cape of this model. And it's like they did some really dramatic non-metallic
Look at the
metals.
snake body on their upcoming plastic fulcrum.
Right.
It was that where it was like,
his
whoa.
weapons. They did it on recently. I can think of who's the Ghoul King?
Usharan.
Usharan's paint job is amazing.
The Baharoth they did an NMM purple saber.
Yep. So there's some examples of them pushing themselves because maybe even the heavy metal style isn't even cutting it anymore.
But if you want to get to a spot where you can push, like you want to reach a new platform, and I think start with Eeavy Metal if you're struggling with brush control and struggling with how to define the spaces on a mini.
Yep.
Now once you've got that down, now you can jump. Right. And we've seen the Eeavy Metal team has had to do the same thing where it's like, well, these artists are putting out stuff with the models we send them early that look better than what we're putting on our box art. So we have to like now up the game on some things too while still maintaining.
I mean, and maybe it's not even the studios pushing for that. Maybe they're as a team, because they usually work on things as a group. Mm-hmm. Like someone will work on a specific part and they'll hand it off to someone else, and then they'll work on something else for bigger models so they can get it done. And maybe individuals are good at certain things, but in order to keep it consistent across the whole team, they share a project, right? Maybe they've decided, well, we should push this part of it, or maybe we should sneak in something into this model that really ups it a little further. We're not being directed to, but like I think this would really up it without really breaking the effect of the Eeavy Metal style
and not seeming unreachable.
Right. So, I mean, I could see something like that too, where they're like, the artists, because they are artists, take it on themselves to push a little farther on a piece they really like or a part they really like. I mean, you're guilty of that, right? Where you see a model and you're like, I need this model, and you get it and you paint a face and a shoulder.
Always.
And you're like, done. It's like that was what I was inspired to do, was just this, this quarter angle of this model. I wanted to do that. That inspired me.
Yep.
And I'm sure other people get that same sort of spark, right? Where it's like, this sword was just phenomenal. I want to push it.
I want to see if I can stay within the parameters of what they want to sell the figure with. But, in that case of Baharoth, they did that where they did this purple NMM saber, his weapon, and it was pushed in a way that you normally don't see from the GW studio. They've done some NMM more recently, but that where they went with this fantastical color, and it was like, I'm guessing because they have a deadline, that painter got to it, realized they had enough time, and were like, you know what, I've always wanted to ...
Right.
Go for it. But then they stayed in the Eeavy Metal parameters in the sense that the colors weren't wild on the sword. It was all just like purple, darker purple, lighter purple for the shadow to light.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's still a great place to aspire to make your next springboard. Right. Is that heavy metal style? Because then you can start learning about light and volumes.
So there's so much more beyond just learning how to put paint on the model.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what color are you supposed to choose for this?
Right.
What colors go well together with each other? What kind of finish do I want to have on this painted part? So I might need to find a medium or a different brand of paint that dries a specific way.
Yep.
Like it gets advanced. There's more to it. Because like if I'm painting cloth, I don't want something that's satin. I don't want something glossy. Like I don't want something that much. I kind of want something flatter, so I can actually create the effects of whatever the material
texture
I want it to be.
and
that kind of stuff. And I don't want it to be hidden by actually catching the light on the paint as opposed to catching light on the edges that I'm painting. So
yeah, and I think so I think a great stepping stone to go from tabletop in your armies to get to that level is like reach for brush control and precision.
Mm-hmm.
Once you start getting that down, everything opens up to you.
Yep.
Now you can learn color theory, and it's like, well, I know how to use my brush to do whatever I want it to do. So now I can apply these colors to.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it'll take some learning. It'll take some studying. It'll take some.
You never run out of things to learn.
Absolutely.
It's always cliched. Like, you never stop learning, but
too, it's
you really never do.
Things I've learned, I then forget and have to learn again. So sometimes you learn it more than once.
I actually had people ask me when I talked about how I'd signed up for classes for Adepticon, and they were like, "Why?
Don't you already do that? Aren't you already good at that?"
They'll point these figures out that I did, and they'll be like, "Well, you did that really good there. Why would you take a class on that subject?" And it's like, well, because one, I'm learning from someone who has a very different style from me,
mm-hmm.
maybe is more experienced than I am, more acclimated, has won all kinds of awards. But it's also like sometimes you forget basic things,
mm-hmm.
I mean,
I've painted things and I look back and I'm like, how did I even do that? That was really good. And I've moved on from there and I try to do it again. I'm like, man, it's not as good as that
I
first
don't
time I did
remember what the technique was or how did I load the brush or, it's like Michael Jordan still went and shot free throws in practice. It's like you figure he's got that down. Why does he need to? But it's like you have to, in a skill, you always have to go back and like remember some core things. And so I think taking classes like that, learning a style, it's just about the heavy metal style is all technique and no art.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds
that's kind of
that sounds mean.
That sounds mean. Yeah.
But it is because like they don't necessarily adhere to some color theory things. They for the colors they tend to choose like object specific. Well, this
pouch is brown, this armor is
a pouch
blue,
is brown, a sword is silver, a thing is whatever, and then they're faction colors. But like from a technical standpoint, it's very precise, and like I think getting those technical things down first before you get to the abstract is a great mid-range founding to spring off from into the other stuff. But from where I am in my painting journey, it's like, well, how do I get to where I'm satisfied with it? But then if I'm going to do Golden Demons competitions, like the level is so high, how am I going to compete with them if I feel like I understand all these things but I'm not quite reaching that level?
Right.
It's like, well, I need to bust out of that into the next thing. I need to learn something I haven't learned or remember something I forgot.
Right.
So
I think the story and the diorama and the base building is a big thing that I think we used to do better at, and we've kind of not kept up with that. Because some of these models you see that are winning the Golden Demons are very simple bases, but yet completely custom, sculpted, like not over the top, but like effective.
They tell a story
right.
in that little
and it's
bit.
just like, man, sometimes we come up with something and it's just like, this is
we just stood them on rocks, or
great base. Like I remember models that we submitted were like, you had one where it wasn't even above the base, where the guy was like standing on a log over a river.
Yep. That was for like, P3 Grandmaster.
It was super cool. It's like a unique thing where like the guy is very much like in a living environment. Like he's using it to like prop himself up, and it was like that was such one of the coolest bases I think I've seen in a long time.
Well, and I look at guys like who won the Slayer Sword in 23, and then
the Gargant,
and then he won. It was the Slayer Sword in Essen.
Oh, okay.
And then
High Elf,
Albert Moreto font with the High Elf with the he called it Lumineth Lord.
Right. Yeah, holding the helmet.
Yeah, and then he did
Skink Chief?
He did the Orc Shaman this last year.
That's the half sculpted one.
He won the AOS single, and I guess he was in contention for the sword, really close.
I mean, thoughts on that? I mean,
His painting level is incredible. Goes without saying.
yeah.
But
and we've had in previous episodes we've talked his style before certain aspect.
Well, and one thing he does with his bases is just that, where the base isn't oversized, which sometimes is what people assume means they did all this extra work, but it might not necessarily add to the piece. His bases are very clever, and they themselves are as equally artistic as the main model, yet they don't draw your attention away from the model. They're just like a joy to look at. And your base game is mega important. And I think you're right. As a group, the First Turn Gaming group, our team always ends up with the base as like the last bit or afterthought.
Or we try to make a good base, and they're like, "Whoa, this is way too small," or "Hey, this is way too big."
Which
There's
is
too much
equally
empty
at flaw.
There's too much empty space that it's not telling enough of a story.
Right.
We've had that happen before too, where we're like, we're not happy with it because it's like we chose way too big of an area.
Now, I've heard a rumor. Some people try to doom and gloom it, like the people who claimed that GW was going to go around and drill into your models to resin check. It was like they were claiming that for this Golden Daemon, this one coming up in 2.5 weeks, that they were going to move anything that was on a scenic base to the diorama category. They didn't put that in their rules packet.
Right.
I don't think that's happening now. Now, they might consider it in the future. They might.
I would like to see more concise rules of what is considered what. Because, I mean, we had, a year or two ago, a Illuminor Xeris that was on just the largest...
A lot of scenery.
Largest base I've ever seen. It wasn't even a base. It was on a scene. It was like a square, like 8x8, sort of. Like it was huge. Like it was maybe it was a 6x6, but it was like the one where he's like standing in front of the light and there's like a shadow casting out from the door
from the monolith. Yeah.
And it was like, this is a gigantic piece. You're telling a story here. I feel like this should be in a diorama. Should not be in single or large, whatever it was. I think it was
40K large.
I don't even know if it was in large. It might have been single. It was weird. It was a weird choice to like allow that in that category.
Well, and so the rumor, and it maybe we'll find out more here when we're there at Adepticon. The rumor is that specifically for the unit categories, so 40K squad, AOS unit, that they don't want 3 to 5 models on a single scene. They would rather you have them each on an individual base so it looks like a unit.
Right. And so like, for example, the last few years we've had these large round
plinths,
like cake tiered plinths.
Right, wedding cakes.
With 5 models on it, all painted and all standing kind of as a group together.
Right.
Unit. It's like...
Right, they're considering that stuff like that, where each model is not on a... Now, you could insert those bases into a scene.
Right. If you had sculpted a base for all of them to slot into.
And people used to do that all the time. Some people still do. But where none of the models are on bases, they're just on a scene, there's rumors that they might require that moves over to diorama. And that said, it's not like that's a downgrade. Diorama is a hard category.
Right.
But like, if your intent was unit, I think they're going to start asking that the models actually be from the same type of unit, which is another thing that people have really towed the line on.
Well, here's a captain and a banner bearer and a terminator and a veteran
and a scout.
It's like, that's not a unit.
Right. And so I think they might start requiring more that the models in the unit are from the same unit,
right?
Whether it's 3 or more models, and then have each model on a base of their own, even if it's within a scene or if it's just on a plaque.
Right.
I think they're saying they don't want the scene to factor into how they judge a unit or squad.
That's for diorama,
right? Which is fair. I think you're still going to have judges who look at the whole scene and that makes them feel something, and they'll put their little sticker on it or whatever that means. But like, I would be okay with that moving to diorama so long as there's an announcement.
Right.
The thing is, I don't care what rules there are so long as you tell us what they are.
Right.
Like I'll adjust to that.
I mean, I think the same thing could be said for, my opinion, when you're skirting the rules a little bit of like, must be a Games Workshop model.
Yeah.
Is another one where I'm like, all right, come on. Because sometimes, we've seen recently too, where it's like you can convert the shit out of something and make it amazing.
Yep.
But if you're sculpting an entire model or 70% of a model to be aesthetically similar to the setting, but you've just made your own model and then painted it magnificently, maybe that's an open category model. You know what I mean? Like, not to say it's unfair to other people when you're not using an official model, but if you're not using an official model, I think you're not playing into the spirit of the painting competition, where you're select GW model and paint it, not like I made one myself, whether it's 3D printed or sculpted out of milliput and clay and green stuff, whatever, and you make your own model, and it's like, yep, submit it into singles.
Well,
It's
the first word you said there is a key. Painting competition. And so I think the reason why they don't typically reward sculpting on its own. So Travarian talked about this because he had done years ago, back when they used to do the games days, he took an Ungor unit for the Warhammer Fantasy unit category, had 5 Ungors, but he didn't like the leather or the armor or whatever they had on, and he just like sculpted their torsos. Looked fantastic. He won like bronze or silver in the category. But they don't reward the sculpting in that sense. So if you go to all this trouble to spend 100+ hours hand sculpting something, you're not rewarded for the sculpting, so why did you even do that when you could have just painted the models? On the other end of that, however...
But I think there's something to be said about a unique thing.
Well, I was going to say, on the other end of what you're talking about, where someone like Albert Moreno Font, who I love his work, when he did that Orc Shaman, he took an old Gorka Morka model and then basically re-sculpted it from scratch and then entered it in Age of Sigmar single.
Right.
Now, conversions happen all the time, but the issue is when you sculpt it yourself, you get a shape, you get a dynamic, you get volumes that like no one else really has on their figure. And the difference between a painting competition where everybody knows how to paint versus someone who has a skill that 85% of the people don't have, and if they're rewarded for that skill, and I mean sculpting, that's tricky now. It's almost an unfair competition where you're adding a skill that most people don't have or won't have the time to learn. And so then you have to start wondering, well, how much sculpting before it becomes an open entry? So like that guy did the like 75 mil scale bust of
Daniel Craig.
Well, there
that one
that at Crystal Brush,
yeah.
But Crystal Brush was an open
Correct.
category. But like no, a couple of years ago, someone did the hand sculpted Mephiston, and it was in the open category because he built it from scratch. It wasn't the same scale. But then you have to wonder, it's like, well, what if he would have sculpted it down to 28 millimeter scale,
right?
And
made a unique Mephiston
and entered it in single. And it wasn't he converted it from GW parts. He just hand sculpted because he's got that ability.
Right?
Would he have been rewarded for the paint job, or would he have been rewarded for the fact that he sculpted something totally unique?
Well, I still think he needs to paint it to an award-winning level.
Correct.
But if you had an award-winning box standard Mephiston and then a hand-sculpted unique Mephiston painted to the same level, I'm going to say the hand-sculpted one wins.
Right. And
I think that's part of the issue, right?
And I think Games Workshop is thinking about that, where it's like, well, we want this to be, don't get me wrong, they're a company who wants their models to be the feature. And so no shame in them admitting that or anybody acknowledging that. And you're right. That example you just gave, if someone hand sculpts a Mephiston and someone paints a box Mephiston and they're right next to each other, they're both painted to a similar standard, that ultra unique sculpted one's probably going to win because of the feelings it generates, and not just based on the painting. And so if Games Workshop's considering that in the future, I could see it. I could see them saying like, okay.
And it's the same thing for bases. Right? If you've got a guy on a gaming base compared to the same exact model painted the exact same way on a scenic base with ruins behind him and stuff like that, it's like the ruins and the extra effort involved in doing the base gets you extra points. Even though it's not necessarily in the rubric of painted model, it still goes into the overall model, therefore it wins.
Well, and that's the thing is like they claim in the rules typically that the scene you create with the basing, and if you have one of those plinths that has a background and you paint a mural and all that, that's not supposed to determine it.
Then why does it matter if it's 3D printed or AI generated then?
So so there's that.
Right.
And then also the judges are still human.
Right.
And so they're going to see it and it's going to invoke thoughts. And when they go to put their little sticker on which one they think should make the next cut or make the trophy round, that one probably is going to get them.
Yeah.
And so credit to the artist for thinking of that, who have that ability and know like, well, if I do this little extra, that's going to make me stand out. But now you're in a situation for everybody else who understands it as a painting competition, who maybe can't sculpt or doesn't think to 3D print this extra thing for the background, and they don't do that, and now they lose out because even though their painting was dynamite, they didn't do extra things. So it's a very controversial topic almost every year. I guess if we were to offer our opinions, which we normally don't take hard stances on stuff,
Right.
but I think whatever they decide, maybe this seems like a cop-out stance, but it's really not, I promise you. Whatever stance Games Workshop decides, since it's their competition, just define it. Define it.
Make it consistent.
And make it consistent.
Because we've also seen things with categories just kind of blurring the lines too, where it's like, here's an Underworld warband, which, I mean, they might have nipped this in the bud. Here's an Underworld warband full of 5 character models. Well, they come in the game as a Legends rules now, unit of 5 models.
Right.
So now, is that a unit in the unit category? Is it an Underworld's warband? If you take just one of them as an AOS single, if you put them all on base together, does it become a diorama?
Right.
Where does this group of 5 models, the same 5 models, what category do they go in? You know what I mean? Like, make it consistent, make it declared. Well, it's from this game, it goes into this category.
Yeah,
or is it like, how are you presenting it? That determines the category.
Well, and we had one year where you had someone who did a mangler squig, or no, whatever the big squig is.
Mangler squig. That's like the 2 squigs attached by a chain.
Well, one was a solo.
Is it the boss on the cave squig?
Might be.
Is it a colossal squig?
Colossal squig.
That was a Forge World one.
Yeah, someone did that, and they just had little farmer.
No, that was a single mangler.
Oh, single.
It was
mangler
one
squig.
of the 2 manglers.
Big bowling ball squig.
Yep.
And then the little like Empire guy running away,
Right.
screaming. That's been used in everything.
Duel.
And it entered in duel because it was 2 models.
Yeah.
That I have an issue with.
I have an issue
Now,
with that too. Because that breaks the actual qualifying
Side
details.
note, as an aside, let me make it known that artist is brilliant.
Yeah.
And the piece looked great.
Yeah.
But
it was the wrong category.
The duel category is not where that belongs. That's a diorama. You created a scene where a monster's chasing a guy, and like,
or if the guy is just extra base filler, that could have been large.
Or it could have been single large, AOS large.
Yep.
And then, and then last year they did the weird thing where they merged dual diorama, and so the guy who did the Space Wolf fighting a Flyrant wanted it in dual, but they forced it into diorama, and he's like, but this is a duel. It's 2 entities fighting of relatively equal power fighting. He wanted it to be in dual. Now, he won gold in the category anyway. I don't know what he's still complaining about, but like but at the same time, I see his point and the inconsistency. Now, Games Workshop has to try to keep up with as fast as the complaints happen, which is always tricky in the age of the internet. But I guess I reiterate that they need to just define terms
and stop changing it
and be consistent.
Find a one that you're happy with and keep it.
Because here's the thing:
for 2 years consecutive, just 2. That's all I want.
Well, that's just it. And once they define the terms, you will still get a wave of complainers who say, "Well, what about?" They'll do the whataboutism, but like, what about? But if you define them and say these are the rules, people will adapt. They'll be like, okay, well, we know now that unit means this and diorama means that, and so they'll make their categories accordingly or their entries accordingly. And I would like that better. Because you do see that line bridged a lot, and people fudge it and get entered into categories where you're like, how come that same unit was in Underworlds that was also an AOS unit? How come that same...
Because that's where the kicker is when you do see the same unit, not just hypothetically, but literally the same unit in 3 different categories.
Yeah, it's like...
And they're not presented in different ways.
No.
It's just 5 individual models on 5 different bases.
Oh, this model was in Old World, it was also an AOS single, it was also in Blood Bowl.
Yeah, it's weird. It doesn't make any sense. We saw one that was like 3 individual non-color matching Space Marines. I don't think it won, but it was like in unit. It's like, these have nothing to do with one another. They're just 3 models you painted for single and put them in the same submission. Like, weird, you know?
And I could see when you're doing the unit that's not a unit, but they're from the same faction, and then you're putting them on the super scenic base, like, move that to diorama. I could see it.
Yeah, 100%.
I could see it. Like, I remember back in the day, I'm going to curmudgeon and talk about when things were better. But it was like unit category and squad category was like you either put them on a movement tray together or you put them on a single plinth together, but they were each on their own base. And like some people, yes, creatively found a way to make the bases fit in the scene. Like you could tell it was a unit. They lined them up like a unit.
Right. They're not back to back with one another. They're literally touching each other. It's like these were 5 models placed throughout a field.
And they were from the same unit and not like you said, where it's like Free Guild Marshal plus Priest plus Scout plus Sword. Plus
a cannon and crew.
Yeah.
Not a unit.
Yeah, not a unit.
Yeah. That's part of an army, but not a unit. Sorry.
No.
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty more we can talk about, but my stomach is starting to growl. I'm getting.
It's
pretty
growling
hungry.
at me as much as I'm about to rant about all this.
Yeah.
So,
But yeah, so there's plenty more to talk about. Obviously, one other little bit I don't think we talked about was Soulblight Gravelord, real quick in AOS.
they're coming soon.
Rumors. There were some rumors that the books have been in hands of advanced copies already, and some stuff is being cut out of the books that is a little contentious because they're not old models that feels like they shouldn't just be relegated to Legends already or turned into, this counts as generic version of model. Obviously, all the old kits that are being straight up replaced 1-to-1 from the new release coming out for Death Rattle, right? So your king on horse, your king on foot, your grave guard. Skeletons have already gotten updated, but your Black Knights are becoming Barrow Knights, whatever. All these kits, 1-to-1 being replaced, with new names being kept to the same rules, so they're all still in. But a lot of the named vampires from the Vrykos dynasty are being sent to Legends and not available anymore. You had
That was weird.
The vampire riding the zombie dragon is not going to be a thing anymore. That old staple model. Now it's going to be a named character, Lord Vordry, riding a zombie Dracolich or something like that.
Right.
Dracolith, or a Dracolith without rider. There will be no
Like
generic
a feral
version of it.
Dracolith, yeah.
Right. Which is a weird choice. I mean, I get you don't want people using their old models because you want them to buy the new one.
Yeah.
But no generic one either. I would buy the new.
So that's
I would buy
interesting.
the new kit for a generic one as well.
You
as
could have
one
got 3
for-
out of there.
Exactly.
They could have done Vordride, they could have done generic Lord on it, and they
Right.
could have done Monster on its own.
Right. 100%. And so it's weird that they didn't do that.
Shame on you, GW.
But things getting cut is never great. Pretty much all of Curse City, all the models that came from that, all those characters, all the vampires from it, the monsters and the beasts from it are all getting cut. They might be keeping the sort of the bat werewolf feral monster on foot, whatever that guy was called.
Radigar?
No. The generic little monster bat guy.
Oh, I don't know.
It's like it was the old it was the Flesh Eater Corpman that got replaced with the weird gangly bald guy.
The Regent? No.
No, I can't remember what he was called now.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
So he's like a werewolf bat. He's the most feral werewolf bat combo ever.
Isn't that in Flesh Eater Courts now?
So it used to be.
Well, in the current Spearhead, Flesh Eater Courts have one.
Yeah, it's
right?
like a weird he's like really long arms. He's like crawling across the battlefield. They've updated the model. So the old one that was just like literally a bat, like an old metal model that was like a bat on foot, got replaced
The
with
Vargulf?
the Vargulf got replaced with a new thing.
Well, so in
but this guy looks like a Vargulf.
Well, the Flesh Eater Courts Spearhead right now has the new plastic Vargulf Courtier or
Right,
whatever
yeah.
it's called.
So the model that came in Curse City is like sort of a spawn, sort of a
I have no idea what
vampire.
model you're talking about.
It's like a feral vampire werewolf. That's the best way to describe it. And he's bigger than any of the models. He's pretty big. He's like an ogre-sized guy. But that model I don't know about because he came in the Curse City box, and I don't know what his fate is.
What's Curse City? Was that ever released?
Yeah,
was it?
it was a board game that had really weird history of like having all of its expansions cut and then released separately, and now they're all
Without
going,
a word?
I assume they're going to Legends, and they're not going to count for anything anymore.
So
But there might be a couple individual models that go for the army that they keep. Right?
We've had mixed like us for all 8 listeners. We're about like ripping the band-aids on stuff.
Yeah.
And if you're going to separate the games, then do it.
Right. However,
At the same time,
the Battle Tome is not the time to do it when
Well,
you
that's just
just
it.
had
in
an index.
in Age of Sigmar 4th
know?
edition, which is a brand new edition, relatively speaking, brand new edition, the battle tomes thus far have only been about what
Loss.
you're taking away,
Right.
what we're losing, and we're never getting anything.
Yeah.
Like-
Git's got some stuff.
Yeah, right. Well,
But, like-
yeah. So you release brand new models, so by
Sure.
default you get new stuff, but it's
You
still
don't get
like
new rules. You don't get new army rules. You don't
This
get no spell lores.
third edition, with the exception of like 2 armies, was you get nothing but a book and a hero.
Mm-hmm.
But you did get new rules, and then in 4th edition, it's been the opposite. It's like you get less rules, but you might get models.
Right.
So
It's weird.
I don't know what's going on there, especially when the game is as successful as
Yeah.
you research that it's doing right now.
Yeah.
So it seems weird because so far we're now on our 5th or 6th book in, and it still feels like every army's losing stuff.
Yeah. Even when you gain stuff, it's like, oh, I lost as much as I gained, though.
Yeah.
That's rough.
It's we're in the era of the Band-Aid,
Yeah.
which may be coming to 40K2 with demons.
The index should have been the time, right? The
You're
index
right.
should have been the time you cut it.
You're right.
Not the battle tome, where I'm paying money for the battle tome just to lose parts of my army. I'll keep the index then, thanks. You know
Exactly.
What I mean?
$60 to lose stuff.
But
I have to pay to lose
I
things?
wondered. We talked about demons last week, and while they're being introduced in a weird way, and there's still armies renowned and stuff that include demons, and they even called out Bellicor by name in a detachment full of demons. It doesn't sound like they're getting a battle tome.
Right.
Or a codex, and so like I wonder what the fate of demons are. It's a weird thing. I don't think they know what they went to do with demons, and we've talked about that of sci-fi versus fantasy and influence and whatnot. You know what? I have a weird question for you, because I think this is odd. It's completely unrelated, but talking about fantasy and like sci-fi worlds and things like that don't necessarily happen in our universe. Everyone speaks English because that's the language we speak and understand.
Yep.
But isn't it weird how there are words that are used in those settings that directly are derived from things in our world?
Yeah.
Right? You ever notice that? It's always really weird. Like if you had like a fantasy setting where it was like, oh, well, you know, he's my mentor. It's like, excuse me? Do you know what a mentor is? Well, the initial source of that word was mentor was a person who was the teacher of Plato. Something like that. Aristotle. One of these guys. And
do you have input on that?
we talked about this earlier. But he was a person. And so when you say like, hey, you're my mentor, you're basically saying like, hey, you're my llama.
Yep.
Because my llama's my teacher, so you know, llama's your teacher.
What difference does it make if Bruce Springsteen's his Shidoshi?
Yeah.
So sport. Right.
Yeah. So it's like that. It's like, well, he's my mentor. It's like, what's a mentor?
Yeah.
You know, like that. It's weird. Or it's like I was talking about describing people from the island of Crete, off of Italy, as being like an untrustworthy people. It's a stereotype. You call them cretins.
Yep. Cretins or
cretins, whatever. And it's like a fantasy world wouldn't know that word. Because they don't have that place and have that assumption and that stereotype or be able to derive that word from a historical thing. And so I don't know. I was thinking about that and how it's kind of funny when you look at like fantasy settings and they use certain words. You're like,
in a made up world, in a made up universe, or in a planet far, far away, they have a word for what was a Greek island.
Exactly. It's weird.
Or the Roman Latinization of a word.
Right.
Like
it's funny. And like I know we have to use words that we understand as the audience, and they're maybe not using that exact word because they're speaking a different language and they're translating it into something we understand for the ease of the viewer, whatever. However, it's just weird. And it's the weird.
Maybe it's a bit of laziness. And the reason I say that is because so Tolkien tried to do the opposite, where he explained entire languages in a made up world. Mm-hmm. But that required thousands of pages of stuff to make 3 books.
Right.
And so, I think other fantasy writers are like, I'll just use the word Cretan.
Tolkien. Jesus, man.
I'll just use the word.
Setting that bar.
I'll just call someone a noob in this fantasy setting or whatever.
Just like,
you know,
you're an archer and you fire an arrow and you hit an orc in the face and he dies. He just goes down and falls off of his giant pig and you're like, oh yeah, poggers.
Yep. Exactly. You just got to make it easy for the reader because you know who's reading your book when you're a fantasy author.
Saying, oh, if you surrender now and throw down your weapons, you'll all be spared. And you go, lol, okay.
Yep.
As a response, whatever.
If you win, but it was at great cost, and you still say Pyrrhic victory, doesn't make sense on another planet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something I was thinking about. So there you go. But let's go eat.
I could eat some food that's got words that are from here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sicilian flatbread.
Yep.
Whatever. All right.
Thanks for joining. We hope you enjoyed. Follow us for more of our weekly episodes on YouTube Podcasts, Spotify, and Podbean. You can follow myself and Llama on Instagram. We are at Llama Paints Minis and Hyena Paints Minis. Music provided by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. And as always, we'll catch you next time.